So let me just introduce everyone. So as I said, the problems with anti-Semitism is that it's rising. One would expect that after the tribulations of the 20th century, things would kind of relax. Jews would be able to, go back to their business. Some in Israel, some in, in the United States and elsewhere, and everything will be just fine. But as we can see, it's not really what's happening. There's a rise in anti-Semitism. Sometimes it's concealed as anti-Zionism. Just last week, we saw Jews in Germany were asked not to wear their kippahs in public anymore for fear of violence. I mean, this situation is not good, and that's an understatement. And I have with me today Ami Horowitz. You're a documentary filmmaker, writer, producer, and director. And I heard as of May 8th, presidential hopeful, right? That's correct.
That's correct.
And we'll get to that later. You've written, produced video content on the issue of anti-Semitism, and then I think some of your things you actually go and you show that there are established institutions out there that are involved with this, and you're trying to take kind of an active approach to exposing the problem, understanding it, maybe even bring it to the general awareness, offering to solve it. So we'll hear about what you're doing. Also with us today is Dr. Michael Laitman. Michael Laitman, PhD in biocybernetics, arguably the world's foremost authority on the authentic wisdom of Kabbalah. In the past few years, Dr. Laitman has extensively taught, is teaching actually, is writing, is lecturing, and it's focused on the role of the Jewish people and the root cause of anti-Semitism and the solution for it, as I've said. So, like I said, I've had extensive talks with Dr. Laitman. I've heard an absolutely different approach to the issue, to the problem and to the solution. And so in these talks, I'm inviting people from across the entire spectrum, pro and anti-Jewish, to challenge Dr. Laitman's unique explanation for the problem of anti-Semitism and his proposed solution. So, Ami, I'd like to start with you. You've been witnessing firsthand the changing attitudes towards Jews, or perhaps the loosening, let's say, of the cultural taboo with regard to the topic, and openly talking against Jews and against Israel. We see it a lot everywhere. So tell me, what have you learned? How could you explain the meteoric rise in anti-Semitism, over 70% compared to last year alone? What is your explanation, or what did you find that contributed to the rise of anti-Semitism, to this re-emergence of the Jewish problem?
I'm glad you asked me such an easy question to answer. You gave me the softball, and I appreciate that. Yes, of course, you are completely right that there is an absolute rise. Meteoric might be the right way to describe it. And anti-Semitism around the world. Well, I say around the world. Let me take a step back, actually. That's not totally true. There are cultures, there are places where Jews are a non-factor. So if you take Asia, a lot of East Asia out of the equation, because there really isn't, there's no historical anti-Semitism there. And there isn't any kind of great rise in anti-Semitism outside of the Islamic world in East Asia, right? Obviously, Indonesia and Malaysia and places like that. But in the Western world in particular, I think we're referring to, yes, there has been a rise in anti-Semitism. And the interesting thing about this anti-Semitism is it's a little bit different than it was before, in the sense that, it's funny, when I was growing up as a kid in Los Angeles, anti-Semitism was kind of a fact of life. It didn't happen all the time, but every year, my synagogue, my school would be defaced in some way. Broken windows, a swastika, dirty Jews, things like that. That was kind of unfortunately, a normal mode of behavior that we kind of lived through, that we expected once or twice a year that would happen, and it did. And then, I don't know, probably around 30 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, it kind of stopped. And we didn't see anti-Semitism actually in a visceral way. Obviously, it was in the Islamic world. We heard a lot about it. We heard about stories, but in our world, in the United States, particularly for me, it wasn't something that we saw a lot of anymore. And it kind of went away for a while. We entered this Goldilocks period. And I would say that over the last 10 years, it has reemerged. And has reemerged slightly differently. There's some of the same in the sense that, obviously, the anti-Semitism from the right is still there. And when I say the right, I mean the extreme right. I mean white nationalists, neo-Nazis, that group. You have seen anti-Semitism among the Islamic world is interesting. It's obviously always existed, right? I mean, really since the beginning. But we didn't see a lot of that in the United States of America. Because really the domain of anti-Semitism for the last, let's say, 50 years was of the extreme right. But you have seen, through a variety of reasons, primarily a rise in Islamic immigration in the United States. You've seen a rise in anti-Semitism among that community here. And obviously you've seen a very extreme rise in, sorry, I'm sweating a little bit, it's so hot in here for some reason. An extreme rise of that in Europe. And I'll get to Europe in a second. So here in the United States, but the newest part of the anti-Semitic equation is from the left. And that we've seen over the last really 10 years. Now, it's obviously, anti-Semitism on the left has existed before. And by the way, if I'm going on too long, let me know, because I could probably go for 45 minutes straight on that. But anti-Semitism on the left is not a new phenomenon. Look, the truth is that if you look at the rise of the creation of the left, the modern left, I would say was, let's say, during the Enlightenment period, right? The French Enlightenment. That's really when the left was created. And a lot of wonderful things obviously occurred from the French Enlightenment. But born with that Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment, was anti-Semitism. Voltaire, maybe the father of the Enlightenment, was an open anti-Semite. He wrote frequently about anti-Semitism. His anti-Semitism, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, was primarily around the issue of religion, and that we were a religious community, and he despised that. And secondly, maybe more importantly, he saw Jews as, because he saw Christianity dying out, he thought the Enlightenment was the end of Christianity. So the testament of Christianity was going to be gone from the Christians, but the Jews are the ones who were left, who saw the rise of Jesus, who saw the rise of Christianity, and could be the testimony, will be the only testimonial left to Jesus. And so he hated the Jews for that as well. So it really was born, it was a twin when it was born, anti-Semitism in the left in Europe. Obviously, if you go a little bit later in the line, Karl Marx, the father of the left when it concerns economics, and his creation, obviously, of Marxism that led to communism. He, despite being a Jew, in fact, his grandparents were Orthodox Jews, he was an open anti-Semite as well. So the left has a history of anti-Semitism, but it didn't manifest itself in a violence over the years. I won't argue that there was a certain amount of violence, but outside of that, it didn't manifest into violence as the extreme right manifested to violence forever. But that's kind of changing now. And we see violence, anti-Semitic attacks that are occurring from the left, particularly on our college campuses. And the reason why you see that is this notion of intersectionality. Intersectionality is the idea that it's a number of things, but the two main concepts of intersectionality is, one, that all oppressed groups are connected in a way. That's why you see gay groups align with Palestinian groups. And also that the people on the top of the economic order are, by definition, oppressing the people at the bottom of the order. So the Jews kind of fall into two categories for this intersectionality, which is why we're kind of the big villain in that theory. And that, first of all, because we are the oppressors of the Palestinians in their mind, therefore all the other groups have to ally against us, who are oppressed. And B, they view us as at the top of the economic pyramid, therefore by definition we're oppressing the people on the bottom, and therefore we're villains as well. Okay, so that's a long-winded answer on why. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm sorry if I'm kind of summarizing, but essentially we see this rise here. And the Jews are both the oppressors and the oppressed, so they're annoying everyone on both sides of the spectrum. And
yeah, yeah. I don't know if anybody views us as the oppressed, to be honest. I think I don't think that's actually a view that's dominant anywhere, neither from the right or the left.
Okay, so but the oppressor, the oppressor. Okay, Dr. Laitman, I know you hold that, and Kabbalah, I understand, speaks about the Jews from a long time ago. It's not something confined to today or even the last 200 years. What is, according to Kabbalistic ideology, what is the reason for this rise of anti-Semitism? Why do we see it? Why is this problem not going away?
This is a problem that cannot go away. It always existed, and it exists now, and it will continue to exist until we remove it through our correct behavior. What Kabbalah explains is that from the moment the people of Israel, the Jews, were established, which took place in ancient Babylon through the school of Abraham, which is about 3,500 years ago. That group was established because in ancient Babylon there was a great crisis that took place, a crisis among human beings. The human egoism erupted and made people start hating each other. Abraham was actually a Babylonian priest who researched what was happening, and he understood that this is because people, human beings, have started to change. The human ego began to evolve. And so he explained that we have to rise above the growth of the human ego. And the slogan for that was love thy friend as thyself, or love covers all crimes. What that means is that those who joined him from all the different little nations in ancient Babylon that existed then, they joined him and left Babylon towards the land of Canaan, or today's Israel. And that group established a way of life of a unified society. They were a society where everyone is like a brother to each other in such a way that they existed through that brotherly love. That was their foundation. Now, after they established themselves and after they went through different exiles and different processes, every time they reunited, they were successful. They prospered. And every time they couldn't, for whatever reason, and that's because of the constant rise of the human ego, and then that society had to rise above the human ego and work against it. And so whenever they couldn't, when they failed to do so, they fell from their status to the point that they were exiled and conquered, and there were different kinds of exile throughout history, until what is called the ruin of the temple. It is a symbol. It's about 2,000 years ago, an event that symbolizes the end of the connection between those people. And Rabbi Akiva, who was the great sage in the nation, tried to cry out that we have to maintain what's called love thy friend as thyself. Otherwise we won't survive, because our nation is not a nation. It's a collection of people from different nations in Babylon. We don't have any original connection. If every nation has an origin that comes from a certain family, in our case, we come from all of those groups and clans and tribes of Babylon, or all the 70 nations of the world, if you will. We came from all of them, and the only thing that unified us was that ideal of love thy friend. And so the maxim that represents the people of Israel is love thy friend as thyself. That means that human connection has to persist and rise above all the egoistic differences between us. But they couldn't maintain that, and they didn't listen to those voices, and they couldn't overcome the growing ego, and that's what's happened. From generation to generation, this is what the engine that drives humanity's evolution, the growth of the human ego. So when they could no longer maintain connection above it, they were exiled and scattered. The people of Israel were scattered in many directions. In the time of the ruin of the first temple, they also lost 10 tribes out of 12. Where are they now? Somewhere in the world. We don't know. Now, what's happening in the meantime is that the world is also evolving. And its evolution, again, is by the growth of the human ego. And that leads the world to various crises, conflicts, wars, etc. And so the world senses that that group must somehow deliver the better life. The nations of the world feel that that the people of Israel is supposed to deliver something good, and it is the obligation of the people of Israel to bring about that unity of mankind, to show how that is possible. Today, we're in a time that Kabbalah, by the way, explains. It's written about it from a long time ago, about what's happening today, that the demand that the nations of the world have towards us is that they feel that if we will do something that we're supposed to do, they'll be better off. And if we don't do that, they'll feel bad. Things will be bad. They inherently feel a certain dependency, that we have some sort of secret, something that we owe the world. Their hatred is not without a basis. It's not just some law of nature that they hate Jews and that's it. No, they themselves don't understand what they hate us, and the common Jew doesn't understand this also. But the wisdom of Kabbalah clarifies this for thousands of years. Because the people of Israel have to create a unity that enables the whole world to achieve unity. Now, this isn't mysticism. This is something that the Book of Zohar explains about 2,000 years ago. And when you study the wisdom of Kabbalah as a wisdom, I also did my PhD on this, and when you study it, you begin to see that this is the only way that we can deliver what we're supposed to deliver, fulfill our obligation towards the world. Now, the moment that we unite, that we connect correctly through these concepts of one shall help his friend, all Israel are brothers, through love of the creations, to love of all created beings. It is something that permeates the world, all nations of the world. Whether they like it or not, they'll begin to sense that they receive a positive force from us. It works in sort of this underground way. This is something that we can deliver to them, communicate to them, radiate to them. And then they will be also capable of connecting amongst themselves and with us. Only that connection between us Jews, the positive connection between us, turns the world, shifts the world to good. And so the world's attitude towards us is not just some instinct of hating Jews. They have inherently, they don't know it, but this is how the law of nature works. Their hatred towards us is because they're expecting us to deliver something positive to them. And they also claim that the Jews are destroying the world. They just can't explain why. And the reason is what I just said. Now, there's a whole lot of details to add to this. There are entire books, not just written by me, but by many Kabbalists since the Book of Zohar or the study of the 10 Sfirot. They all write about this. And this is really what it's about. What we need to do, what we have to do, is unity between us. And we don't need to ask anyone. We don't need to wait for anyone. If we solve this problem among the Jews, the whole world will start healing and respect us instead of hate us. That's it.
There's the answer. All done. we gotta get rid of sinat chinam among Jews, and then the answer. Listen, you're 100% right. I just don't know. I'd like to see that in my lifetime. If we could achieve that in my lifetime, I would die a very happy person.
That's true. That's true. But I'm pointing at the reason here. What is actually happening? What do we need to do? There's actually no point in further researching anti-Semitism and how it evolves in Germany or modern America, or how much it appears in Asia or in other places. What we actually have to put our attention, to put our focus on, is the Jews themselves. If we make this connection happen instead of division, everything will fall into place. It will all begin to move positively. I'm talking from also in my early profession. I used to study biocybernetics. That was my first profession from university, and it's about the operation of the systems of the human body, how they're all interdependent, how they're all integrated. That led me to research human society and understand how that works. And eventually, I understood that there is this hub within human society, which is the people of Israel, and right now it acts negatively. It acts negatively. It shows a negative example to all the people. Look at what's happening among the people of Israel themselves. Why? Because that nation comes from a connection, an integration of all the 70 nations of the world. We are not relatives because we have a common mother and father. No, we actually came from all the various nations in ancient Babylon. This is something that is not just written in the Bible, but also historians see hints to this and mention this. All of the cradle of human civilization took place in ancient Babylon. And we emerge from all the various nations. So there's no connection between us besides being like brothers in arms when we're pushed, when we're hated, so we're pushed to be with each other, to help each other. But actually, we don't have this innate kind of connection if not for love thy friend as thyself. And that was the basis of this nation, that Abraham, the father of the nation, put us together that way. And so we have to show that connection between us now, and that is what will heal everything. Otherwise, anti-Semitism will continue even to the point of another Holocaust.
So should I just jump in, or do you want to moderate? So I agree and I disagree. So my agreement comes from, yes, ultimately the only barrier we have, the only armor we have against anti-Semitism, which by the way will never go away, whether or not we're together or not together, as a nation. And the divisions we have amongst ourselves now, as it did during the Beit HaMikdash, when Sinat Chinam led to the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, that was a direct result of it, that we have the same unfortunate situation that we have today. That I agree 100%. Where I disagree slightly with you is only that how do we get ourselves together is that when I do what I do, so I have in my travels, in my videos, in my movies, anti-Semite. I have sat next to leaders of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, neo-Nazis in Europe, the KKK in America. I've sat with them all. I faced them all. And the reason why I do this is not because I'm a thrill seeker, is because, and I don't do it to show the rest of the world how much people hate Jews. That's not my intention. My intention is to wake up Jews, to wake up our nation to what is out there. The reason why we're divided is because a lot of Jews, particularly in America, maybe a little less so in Israel, but there's obviously still division there. They don't care. They don't know. Israel's not a major issue for them. They don't understand the threats out there. And so they look at religious Jews, they look at different kinds of Jews, and they go, oh, those are the kind of people I don't want to be associated with. But when they come to realize that this threat is real, this threat is out there, I unfortunately think that's the only thing that's going to bring us together. What's going to bring us together, I think, is a threat from the outside. I wish that ahava, that love of one's brother, could bring us together. I don't see that right now. Maybe ultimately that will be the result. But right now, in order to bring us together, I have to show them the threat that is out there. And that's kind of why I do what I do.
Okay. I just wanted to say that what's happening between the Jews is also happening among all the nations. The difference still is that all the nations cannot come to peace and love, tranquility between them. Because the Jews came from being representatives of all the nations of the world, if they begin to engage in connection, it will spread across the world. And that is how the whole world can come to peace. And so good to the world can only happen if we enable that connection, because we are like representatives of all the world combined in this mini model, in this one group. And that's why if we do that, the world will move to a better place. And otherwise, can certainly reach the threat of a world war, another world war, etc. But if we don't work towards connection, that positive connection between the Jews, the world will continue to throw a blaming finger at us for all their troubles, and in fact, they'll be right. They'll be right. We have no other choice but to do this.
I agree. I agree completely.
And I'm curious about something, because Ami, you said something that you think that anti-Semitism will always stay, and Dr. Laitman, you think that oh, not you, but you say that according to Kabbalah, if Jews somehow start to act in love towards one another, kind of reignite, re-enliven the connection between them, other things will change. Not just so. What will change? What kind of world will we see? Is this going to be a world where Jews are simply left alone, or are we looking to other changes in the system as well?
Again, because we are representatives of all the nations of the world, automatically, when we change our behavior to each other, the world follows suit. Israel comes from Li Rosh. That's what it means, the head, the part of that is the head for the world. We radiate what we do to the rest of the world. And that's why there's not a lot of point in trying to figure out the different forces of anti-Semitism in the world, because it will continue and it will grow. Human egoism is constantly growing, and as a result, anti-Semitism grows as well. And if 100 years ago, a nation like Germany, who was very evolved and became especially Nazi, today, almost all people are evolved or developed in the same way, to sense that there is a certain dependency on the people of Israel and that they do harm to them. And so they talk about all kinds of examples and excuses, justifications, that you rule the banks, that you rule the institutions, that you rule higher education, all government, but that's not the real problem. The problem is that what you're controlling is human connection, and you're driving human connection to a negative place, to be ruled by the ego. Look at the country of Israel, the state of Israel itself, what's happening here, Israeli society. I probably don't need to tell you how much division we have here, how much separation. And that in turn causes the whole world to be that way and brings hatred back to us. And also it brings about hatred around the world. Let's say I wasn't Jewish, or yes or no, it doesn't matter. If I'm just talking about a positive form of connection for the world, let's see what's happening with human beings today. Everything is, look where everything is going. We're as if becoming worse than animals in some senses. All of this depends on the Jews. I can also share with you sources that discuss this from the Kabbalistic writings from thousands of years ago, and also from more modern times, that discuss exactly that. It's just that the people of Israel reject the wisdom of Kabbalah. The Orthodox Jews also reject the wisdom of Kabbalah. They're good where they are. Everyone stays where they are and kind of pushes away the other factions. And that's what's happening.
I'm wondering, because I think we have a general, I feel like there's a general agreement that this unity, that if Jewish people will discover that is already going to improve everyone's lives tremendously, and not to mention maybe bring about other results around. The question is how to get there. Ami, to your point, you are, as you mentioned, you're trying to awaken Jews to the threat that surrounds them. Do you think that that they will associate this threat with their lack of connection? What do you think? What do you think will happen? What do you think will be a good kind of outcome of this awakening, according to how you do things?
Look, I think that what I do and what other people like Dr. Laitman do is a partnership. I drive them through fear to you, and then you take them and you explain to them why they need to be together, okay? Look, I would love my job to be the job of explaining to Jews why, in a positive sense, we should be together. I think it's important. I think that that's ultimately what will bring us together. But in order for them to move to that position where they're in the position to accept that teaching, I unfortunately think fear is the only thing we can use. Believe me, we've been trying other methods for a while to bring the Jewish people together, and it has not worked. It hasn't worked in Israel, and hasn't worked here. Look, in Israel, you've seen an example of it already. You see an example of how fear and how how Israelis view that the world is kind of ganged up against them in a way that has really united them. Now, there's obviously a lot of religious divisions in Israel, obviously, and that papers them over a little bit. But I think that, look, the left in Israel is no longer a real force. When I was growing up, the left was a real thing. Meretz was something that was powerful and really drove the conversation. It doesn't anymore. There's a left of center, obviously, but really it has the society has moved a little more to the right politically, and that's because primarily they see what the world is looking like and becoming, and they realize that that's kind of the direction they have to move in. So we do see a coalescing in Israel a little bit around something because of fear. So I do think there's, and that same dugma, sorry, I'm finding in Hebrew sometimes because it's Dr. Laitman, that same example could be used here and is working here in the United States. And they see that there is something coalescing around the world in America against them that I think will bring them together. I don't like it, that's the reason that we're getting together, but it is what it is. And once I think we're a little more politically together, that will make it easier for us to get together in a more positive sense of understanding each other. I joke that Shtisel has done more for the Haredi community among Jews than anything I've ever seen before, right? I'm joking, but it's also some reality to it. Where you get to see someone else's life and you look at them not as a thing, as an opposition, but in a personal way, I think it does wonders for how you view them. So that's how we get to know each other in a more personal way. I think a lot of these solutions will start coming around, and people like Dr. Laitman and other people like him can explain why the Jews need to be together in a positive sense, while I brought them there from a negative perspective. I think those work together.
Dr. Laitman, I know you mentioned a lot that, as Ami said, that Jews, they can't listen. They're very stubborn people, very stiff-necked people, and that it's usually the problems that bring them together. If the problems, as Ami said, will bring together, what do they have to do? You say the wisdom of Kabbalah. People think Kabbalah is some religion, mysticism. What in practicality would Jews have to do? Would they have to just be nicer to one another? What's the actual?
This is why I would tell Ami and ask him for help. If you don't reject it, if you agree, I'll send you all sorts of materials that could interest you about something very to the point, of course, that have to do with what we talked about with regards to the Jews. And hopefully, if you find interest in that, then you can also see how to integrate this somehow. I feel a warm heart from Ami, and that he cares a lot about the future of the nation. According to the wisdom of Kabbalah, we're facing a very difficult time that is coming. The nations of the world are going to come together if we don't come together positively, the nations will come together negatively to join into a negative force, and then we will have nowhere to hide. Not America, not Israel, not anywhere in the world. I really hope that we will be able to explain, to communicate at least to some of the Jews. In this case, I'm actually thinking that the secular Jews will hear better, and they, I think, can better understand that the future depends on their unity. But we have no other solution. We shouldn't focus on what's happening among the nations of the world, because they don't determine anything here. Unfortunately, we determine it through the relationship between us. We determine what will happen with them. If it's possible, I would appreciate having Ami look at some materials and maybe just to highlight this concept that everything depends on the unity of the Jews. And through our connection, the more we work on it or the less we work on it, that is what determines how the nations of the world are connected to us, positively or negatively. We do, in fact, turn the world around like they claim. And this is happening for thousands of years, not just today. This dynamic is going on, but it has never reached the state that the world is today, because the world today is interconnected. It is a global world. Human ego has driven the world to a certain interconnection that cannot be broken, and that's why it's so threatening today. Please.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the big question, I don't know if we probably won't have time in this talk, although every talk really brings out interesting points, is really how to get even the rest of the world to kind of look up at the Jewish people as a positive example, as a role model for connection, and not just another attempt to be prideful.
It's not going to be a problem, Leo. This is the world. The whole world does not play a factor here. It all depends on our behavior and our relationship. If you turn it to the better, you'll see the world moving to a better place, and the other way around. The ball is in your court.
Ami, we mentioned at the very beginning that you're running for presidency. I don't know how that campaign is going. You have de Blasio on one side and 30 other people on the other side. I'm just curious. I mean, we're not going to get into all of this, but let's say you're elected president. What would be your attitude towards anti-Semites, towards hate crimes? In this country, if someone says something not nice, they label it as a hate crime. There's a law against it. It doesn't change people's feelings, really. What would be your attitude towards anti-Semites? All these voices calling for violence against the Jews. What would be your attitude towards them and towards the Jews if elected president?
I don't know. Unfortunately, I've got to take my daughter to the doctor in about 5 minutes. So I'll just leave it with his last statement.
We have 5 minutes, so we're done.
Wow, that's an interesting. How do I answer that? Okay, so let me say this. And America is a little bit different than the rest of the world, particularly Europe, in this sense. Free speech is one of the most important values in the United States. You have a right to be an anti-Semite here. You have a right to deny the Holocaust. You have a right to be a disgusting, terrible person. There's no law that says you cannot say that. And I'm a believer of that. I am a believer of that. First of all, in a practical sense, I want to know who's out there who hates us. And by having them have the freedom to speak the way they do, I get a sense of where they are, who they are, and where we are. If we hide it and put it underground, I don't think it helps us. Nor does it help the conversation when you can say, look, they have the freedom of speech to be anti-Semitic. I have the freedom of speech to counter them in the wider world. So I'm not a big believer in outlawing denial of the Holocaust and outlawing anti-Semitism like the way Europe is trying to do as a fix. That's not the fix. You have to work with the underlying problem and why they're anti-Semites and where's that coming from. putting aside Dr. Laitman's solution of that we have to be together as one will solve all the problems, which I agree, but in a more practical sense, look, my attitude for the Jews would be, you're going to see the first Seder in the White House, right? You're going to see all the Chagim will be practiced in the White House. It'll be, it'll be both, I think, one of the greatest things for Jews to see an example of an Orthodox Jew in the White House. And I think also it's going to also bring about, I think, some very negative things. I think people start looking at, it'll highlight what the fear of a lot of the anti-Semites out there are. Look, the Jews are taking over. The Jews are taking over. In life, there's always duality. In life, there's always two sides that are trying to balance each other. That's life in general. Every religion, every culture has that concept, and it's true. With a Jewish president, you're going to see both the positive and the negative, the yin and the yang. And I think that's important. But I think ultimately, I make a pretty good president. So yeah, I think I'm pursuing it. So,
Dr. Laitman, in short, 1 minute, we want to let Ami go. If he would become U.S. president, what would your suggestion to him would be? With the first order of business, what should he do as president of the United States? Because I know you've written actually open letters to several presidents, I know.
I would advise Ami Horowitz to be a president for the whole world through being a president for the US and a president for the Jews. And so to really tell everyone, explain to everyone through a very broad educational system to the whole world where we have to go, that the whole world must work on its integrated interconnection. The whole world has to be connected because it's a law of nature. The natural law of evolution drives us to be one circle, one integrated connection between all human beings. And this is something that is a natural law that you can't want it or not want it. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. We're being pushed towards this. Now, in order to meet with this law of integrality, let's look at the still vegetative and animate levels of being. They're all interconnected and interdependent, and they are connected properly. It's only the human who is involved in everything in the world, who is corrupting everything, humanity, that is. And so there is one part of humanity which is like a representative of all of humanity, as I said, from the times of Babylon. It is a group that represents all of humanity. And that group has to make that model of connection. And then all of humanity will be able to follow that model of connection. And we will also come into balance with all of nature. That includes the ecosystem and everything else. When we, for instance, hear that Jews, voices yelling that Jews are to blame for the ecology, for even a hurricane that happens, it's true. It's indirectly, it's actually true, because any unbalanced forces in nature result from the lack of connection among human beings, since they're in the highest level in this hierarchy of natural forces. And that's what happens, that through our lack of connection, we cause imbalance throughout all of nature. It ripples throughout the system. And everything negative that happens is actually a result of that. So this is something that I would make sure to explain to everyone first. I wouldn't be worried about anything besides education. Educating human beings what it means to be connected, how to achieve that, and how that solves all the problems in the world. That is the main thing that we need. So we'll vote for you to be a president and realize this educational plan.
thank you.
All right?
Okay.
Well,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ami. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Dr. Laitman. As usual, these conversations are very enlightening to our viewers. Please like, subscribe, leave comments and questions. We'll try to bring more interesting conversations and challenge the views of Kabbalah on the role of the Jews. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.